Thank you for joining us at Square One's Lunch and Learn series. I'm your host, Trisha Ari, Senior Director of Operations at Square One Engineering. Today, we have founder and CEO of Finally Quiet, Peman Montazemi. He comes to us as an executive leader and advisor in the medical device industry and has launched 13 global products during his tenure. And he's not done yet. Peman and his company, Finally Quiet, won the 2025 Innovator of the Year for Excellence in Healthcare by the Greater Irvine Chamber, nominated for the Octane High Tech Awards for the 2025 Best Tech of the Year, and was recently nominated for the Orange County Business Journal's 2025 Innovator of the Year Award. What a year. So now I'd like to turn this over to my friend, Peman Montazemi.
Thank you, Trisha, and thank you, Z, and thank you, everyone, for joining this afternoon. Very excited to be here, an honor and a privilege. And thank you, of course, Square One Engineering, for having Finally Quiet. I would like to cover, very quickly the agenda that we have. It's a, short call. It's only 30 minutes, but I think there are plenty of, exciting stuff to cover, part of the journey of an entrepreneur. The agenda will cover, of course, the harsh realities of med device product development lifecycle, or PDLC. We'll talk about, entrepreneurship in MedTech, and specifically, nowadays, as of August of 2025. And then things I'll tell, my younger self with lessons learned. The harsher ones, I think, are the juicy ones and the ones that are really, building character. And I would love, to share them, with our wonderful, attendees, today. So with this said, let's jump right into it. So, we'll talk about the harsh realities of PDLC, and there are 2 slides on this specific matter. Really, it comes, okay, there's an idea, we recognize a problem in the field. There's a lack of solution, there's a gap in the current solutions and offerings that are, whether it is pricing or feature set or whatnot. A lot of complexity goes into having alignment for a product, to be successful. We're about to launch ourselves in multiple years of very hard work and dedicated, focused work, and hopefully at some point getting investment and things like that. And so there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot at stake. Finding the product market fit, regulatory fit, is an art by itself. I'll also add to that reimbursement, because of course the reimbursement codes and things like that are sometimes a must for a product to be adopted for a certain hospital system or any kind of clinic. And the other thing that a lot of people who, whether you come from the clinical side or R&D side or engineering, we try to kind of put a solution into a problem and create basically a solution for in search of a problem. And those are, I guess, the biggest culprits and traps that we can fall into, because we try to be innovative. We see things and we think it's a great thing, but at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is to make sure that we have as many conversations with the end users, but also insurances, reimbursement, and of course regulatory fit with the FDA in the case of the United States market. The next thing is the design and development complexities. And there are a few parts of that. There are cross-functional dependencies, depending on the complexity of the device. If it's just a pure mechanical device, the minute you add any kind of electronics into it, then now we're talking, cybersecurity, and you may have information from the patient on it. Then you're talking about HIPAA and where does the information is. If your device happen to have any kind of connectivity, then now is the holy grail, because now you have to worry about, cloud, and then where you have a mobile application, is the wireless communication secure and whatnot. And every time, of course, because humans will be using these, you need to control, have always considerations in human factors in design controls. And of course, with a thick layer, which a lot of us, have done, which is the ISO 14097 on risk management. And unfortunately, AI hasn't made that any easier. And it is important to talk about, the reduction in forces, that the FDA has seen and whatnot. Those things have to be planned ahead of time, because some of the waiting time to get into Q-subs with the FDA or getting any kind of letter from them or response can take longer, lately. So those are all the complexities to consider while we have staff that is waiting and is working on the solution and iterating very rapidly on any kind of solution they'll be offering for that specific market. And we talk about the regulatory maze. And we talk about the FDA pathways, on the in vitro diagnostic side, of course, you have the CLIA waived and, point of care, and then some of the accelerated paths that they have. You have some breakthroughs overall for medical devices, or breakthrough paths. Most lately, again, because of the reduction in force, some of them, land more on the 510(k) side than de novo, but still there's always a risk, to have a de novo, notification or classification based on those early conversations. So very early conversation is definitely, recommended. For finally, quite specifically, I'm about to hold my 54th meeting with the FDA, and of course, it's 25 years is a very long time, but I think the biggest lesson learned is that never make assumptions once you enter those Q subs, because, for instance, for finally quiet, it's yes, it's great, we're innovation, we're this and that, but every time you hear innovation, is also risk that comes with it for the FDA, because something like that may not have been done in the past, at least it is. And so therefore, there's always a chance that it gets bumped up to a de novo, even a class 3 in some cases, some very rare cases, but it is always a risk. So those are the dynamics that we're dealing with as of this meeting. And so the earlier we have those conversations and the better it is. And overall, the FDA has been a lot more receptive, to innovation, over the past decade, I would say, and has been really, really a lot more supportive. And of course, because of the staff and the number of people that they used to have. Pitfalls in pre-submissions and test planning, you know, it could be that, when it comes specifically of human interaction or indwelling into human body, and the worst case will be actually to have an implantable device, which is class 3. Those are some of the considerations. And of course, you have PhDs that have, very, very in-depth background in biology, or they could have any kind of, biocompatibility background. So it is very important to make sure that on those interfaces between devices and humans, you have full coverage and you have at least 2 or 3 opinions or a solid, regulatory when it comes to those discussions, because you have to be prepared to have at least 1 to 2 PhDs on the FDA side to be able to respond to those specific biocompatibility issues, because you may propose a certain model, you may propose a sheep or a swine pig or anything like that, and they say, no, we see this model being better, or that number of tests, and then additional results will do what for you? It will basically elongate or prolongate your timeline, which then you need more funding, and we'll talk in a second about that. So that's about this specific slide. And then after this one, maybe we take a few questions, on the first topic of this specific agenda. So verification and validation bottlenecks. We talk about design freeze versus innovation. As an engineer myself, I'm always, going after the shiny stuff, the shiny stars. Being in design freeze is the complete opposite of that. I would even have engineers, a part of my team, who would come up, oh, this latest tool has come out, or this development kit, or this software, or whatnot. Can we get a hold of it? And it's very hard to say no, because you don't want to discourage, your engineers, but at the same time, we would get them development kits so that they can play with them, but will not end up in the product. And that's how we have successfully, mitigated that specific result. So we keep them, excited. But when it's design freeze, it's design freeze, right? We're not going to change the design. None of the versions, everything is version control. And so that's some of the challenges, because feature creep is another one. Clinicians would come up with ideas, and we have to really be very ruthless in the execution of the project management of saying, okay, in these versions the specific features go, and we'll push these to the next one is not going to cut it this time, because we have to, of course, have a product very rapidly and collect feedback from the market. Manufacturing and scaling. So design for manufacturing and assembly is in a highly constrained environment. It's very important from the beginning, when you're doing all your sub-assemblies and coming up with a full assembly and obviously the system, to consider these things and working with people who know how to do that, and having partners or engineers or a combination of both who know how to do that, because at some point we'll be going also doing design transfer to manufacturing, and we'll be also doing design for cost and cost optimization, potentially part of that, as long as those endpoints don't change with the FDA. And of course, my biggest thing for me myself is, like, my number one hire in the company is always quality. has always been, and it will always stay. And I've made those mistakes in the past where we say, oh, we can hire this and that and whatnot, but quality is, the pavement and underneath and the building blocks of the entire company, specifically for regulated companies like medical devices, etc. So and I also have them report to the CEO, so they hold the CEO accountable at the highest level of the organization on culture, on behavior, on what is it that exactly this market needs, which is again quality products that go through regulation, go through the highest quality and observation in quality assurance and quality control. And that's always has been a very, I would say, success story that I would love, to share with the folks today. Um, and then finally, funding while building, dual pressure or burn rate, plus compliance. Compliance goes against burn rate. You always want to say time to market, or TTM, TTM. You will hear that all the time. But at the same time, compliance takes time. The shortest time frame is 30 days. Some of them are 90. Some of the time frames, with the FDA are 180 days, typically, between 30 and 90, with some prolongations, to 150 days, depending on how fast, they can get back to your files. Those don't work hand in hand. So what we have done, or at least I've done successfully with my teams in the past, is to always have something in the pipeline so we keep the teams busy and we budget properly before we get to a clearance, and still continue to create value on a daily basis. And finally, grants versus direct funding in early state of device companies. We're just about to submit this week actually our phase one SBIR for Finally Quiet. It's a very exciting time for us. And I would always encourage, as long as you can, to try to go for those grants. And yes, we know that some of the federal members who are doing these reviews, or some of the funding and whatnot, has been not as solid as before, but it is still a very strong strategy to try to create and de-risk from an R&D perspective the company as much as possible on non-dilutive funding versus selling shares of your company and then funding it that way. A mix of both, of course, is always a very healthy thing, but also people who are investing in a company, if they see that you were able to obtain non-dilutive funding, is also signals a very strong technology to investors. All right, moving on with the agenda. What they don't tell you, and then so we talk about entrepreneurship in medtech, the mental resilience. Trisha and I, before this meeting, we had a small conversation, and we talk about 365 days and a quarter, and some decimals is your year. But in that year, you may get maybe 10 very great days or excellent days for the company. You will receive a million no's. You will receive a million misalignments. And it's not that people are bad or anything like that. It's just that people have different visions, they have different wills, they have different intentions. Sometimes it's a mismatch. In our case, we're working in dental with potential getting into surgical suites for orthopedic surgeries and stuff like that. It's a very niche market. We have to find, people who are aligned for that. You have to find investors, who find people on the regulatory side, etc. So it becomes really a mental resilience game. And for us, nobody tells you this, but we have been in this for 12 years. On August 20th, we just celebrated our 12th anniversary of the technology, since my wife, who's a dentist, brought this problem of dental noise to my attention. So you really need to have grit and stay with the problem for the longest, to be able to solve it. If you give up very rapidly, then you won't even get to build the team, with or without budget. And of course, you will have to wear a million different hats. We said 10 hats will be the maximum we're going to put on this slide, but it goes without say that you need to have tremendous amount of tenacity, resilience, and persistence and perseverance on a daily basis. And it goes the same for any kind of thing. It's just that in regulated environments is even more, because there are factors that are out of your hands. You can do all the things that you want. You still need to be lucky. You still need to do everything the way you can in order to position the FDA or the notified body, and to play in your favor. And of course, you'll have moments of failure. And at Finally Quiet, the way we took those moments of failure, we just did an extremely in-depth analysis of those failures to understand the why. So your root cause analysis, or RCA process, has to be so deep. Even if it's a company of one, that you hold yourself accountable to those, and you make sure that those things of the past are of the past and they never repeat again. If committing the same mistake twice, let alone, 3 times or twice, that's a huge, failure of that system, and you may never get a chance again, to move forward with your startup. So, um, in closing, thoughts before we turn the table, to our Q&A session, advice to my younger self, as my dad would always say, okay, you did all these things, which is motion, right? You did all this, you did that, you spent that money, you invested this, you talked to this, you talked to that person, you held this meeting. What was the result? What is the value that you created for your company with that, which is progress, right? The two have to be very distinct compared to each other. Motion doesn't mean progress. And having these calls and whatnot, whether it's with investors, whether it's with engineers, with the FDA, unless it moves the needle in a common ground towards that final goal, it is not considered value creation. It is not considered progress. It can be lesson learned, and our next iteration has to be better than that. But at the end of the day, only results matter, and that ultimately ends up being value created for the company. Work with people in your trenches. I think that's the biggest advice. Um, I've been working with Square One Engineering since 2017 from my days, when I was at BIT Group and a few other groups. And you can't do everything. You can't invent the chipsets. You cannot, clear, clean rooms and have them, certified. You cannot, do your VNV, all the VNV and development, and do cybersecurity, and do HIPAA compliance, and do cloud, and then do mobile cybersecurity, and, artificial intelligence. All these, we can move much faster, specifically in the world of startup, if we have the right partners. And for me, those partners have been key, so that on day one when we start, that's how we're able to push a product, to market, or to being in the first patient in less than 15 months. Okay, that's how these miracles happen. They don't happen because, oh, I want to reinvent the whole world and the whole wheel. Those partnerships are critical. And that's where, speed versus clarity becomes very important, because you need to be very clear with those partners what those interfaces is. And that documentation is super important, because the better you communicate, the better you plan, the better you document what of that interface is, and the less confused your partners will be, because those hooks are ultimately what they use to build what you want them to build. If you're not clear, then guess what? You're going to get an unclear product, and there's going to have issues. And then finally, the hard stuff. I think the biggest hard stuff is get ready mentally for this, because a lot of startups fail. 75% of them, fail in the first, 4 to 5 years. And then, why don't we hear about unicorns, left and right, and why $1 billion, $2 billion exits on a daily basis? Those are very rare. So you have to also be ready and set expectations correctly, because it's going to take also a little bit of luck, to make sure that you deliver on your startup.